Negreanu checks, and Doug Polk does opt to go for a small bluff. And I can already tell you, if he's betting small on this flop, he knows he's going to get called a lot. So if he's going to get called a lot on the flop, he's going to use this hand as a bluff on the turn, and he's probably going to use this hand as a bluff on the river. Hello everyone, I'm Jonathan Little. I'm here today with another hand from the High Stakes Feud between Doug Polk and Daniel Negreanu. They are battling it out, playing 200, 400, no limit, Texas style, the Cadillac of poker. Here we have Doug Polk raising it up with pocket fours, perfectly fine and standard. And Negreanu with his queen nine of hearts can 3-bet or call, either play is fine. If you are not fully aware of how to play before the flop heads up, check out my completely free downloadable heads up charts at pokercoaching.com/HUNL. Go get those, they're completely for free. You might as well know how to play well before the flop because that will set you up to play well on the later betting rounds. Back around to Doug Polk, easy call. You're going to be calling a lot of the time in position against the 3-bet, so he does call. Flop comes queen, jack, 2. Okay, this is a situation where a lot of people in Daniel Negreanu's shoes go for a bet with their entire range. And in the past, I think Negreanu probably would have just bet 20% pot here with his entire range. And I don't actually hate that strategy. However, it's not quite the GTO strategy. It turns out the GTO strategy wants to check in this spot some portion of the time with some queens, some jacks, and some weaker hands. And that is going to allow you to play a smaller pot with your marginal hands. And if we take a look here at the GTO strategy for Negreanu, take a look at this, right? We see all of these queens, queen jack, queen 10, queen 9, queen 8, all of these queens opt to check about 25% of the time. Also, the jacks opt to check about 30% of the time. And the under pairs opt to check a decent amount of the time. And you may say, why not just bet everything? Wouldn't that be easier? And yeah, it would be easier, but it's going to leave a little bit of money on the table. As your skills improve, you want to make sure you play closer and closer to the GTO strategy, assuming you're playing against someone who also plays a good, fundamentally sound strategy. So in this situation, the hands in dark red are bet using a 66% pot bet. The light red is bet using a 20% pot bet. The green hands are checked, and the gray hands are not in the range because those did not 3-bet before the flop. So we take a look here. The best hands to bet big with are usually the absolute best hands that are happy to get their money in, but are still a little bit susceptible to being outdrawn. That's going to be these over pairs, right? Aces and kings, ace, queen, king, queen. And then some bluffs that have additional equity. And that's going to be stuff like ace 4, ace 3, ace 5, backdoor draws. Also some king highs with backdoor draws. And then some straight draws down in this vicinity with backdoor draws as well, right? So these are hands you want to bet big. You want to be doing a lot of small betting with a lot of your other hands. But we do see some of these total junky hands plus some queens, jacks, and pairs opting to check. Okay? So Negreanu does check in this scenario, and Doug Polk has to decide how he wants to play these pocket fours. This is a neat scenario because if he thinks Negreanu's checking range is a little bit too weak, and you may say, how could it be too weak? Maybe Negreanu always bets all of his queens and bets all of his jacks, which means when he checks, he has a hand like pocket 10s and worse. If he thinks Negreanu's range is pocket 10s and worse, or maybe a weak jack and worse, that means that whenever he goes for the bet on the flop, the turn, and the river, Negreanu will fold out almost everything by the river. Do you hear the sirens outside? Alarm bells are going off. Be careful, Doug Polk, he has the queen. Let me shut this door. We're living in COVID times, working from home, you know? We can't go to our fancy office where we have a nice recording studio. No, we have to go in the little home office. Okay. I'd have no fancy studio. All I have is a home office. I do my best for all of you. I hope you enjoyed. If you like these videos, please do me a favor. Click the like button. Click the subscribe button below. Show me some love. It's rough. Hope 2021's better than 2020. How about you? All right. Anyway, back to this hand. In this situation, if Negreanu's checking range is too weak, Doug Polk should drastically overbluff. And I think that's probably what's happening in this match that's allowing Doug Polk to win a lot of the small and medium-sized pots. Now, he is going to end up triple barreling off into Negreanu's best hands that opt to check some portion of the time, but in exchange for that, he wins a lot of small pots, which allows him to just slowly chip up. So, Negreanu has to be hyper vigilant of making sure his checking range is not too weak, and seeing him check this queen 9 is a good sign of that. So in this scenario, Negreanu checks, and Doug Polk does opt to go for a small bluff. And I can already tell you, if he's betting small on this flop, he knows he's going to get called a lot. So if he's going to get called a lot on the flop, he's going to use this hand as a bluff on the turn, and he's probably going to use this hand as a bluff on the river, because you don't want to bet the flop and the turn and get called by like pocket eights, and then just let it check on the river and let pocket eights win, right? So the plan here is very often to triple barrel off. Let's take a look at the GTO strategy, though, for Doug Polk. As we see, pocket fours basically never bets. It only bets about 10% of the time. And that tells me either Doug Polk randomly decided to take this rare aggressive line, or he is presuming that Daniel Negreanu's checking range is far too weak, which maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I don't know. Let's take a look at the hands that want to bet in this scenario. Generally, he wants to bet with his best hands, right? His strong queens, his strong jacks, and then some junky draws, right? Makes sense. Whenever you are betting in these scenarios, usually you're betting very polarized with your best hands and your draws, and draws is kind of a loose term here. Because whenever your opponent does call, they're usually going to have something decent, right? So either you want to have hands that beat their calling range, or hands that have equity against their calling range, like the ace high and the king high over here do. And when it gets back to Negreanu, as you see, Negreanu's doing a whole lot of calling with all of his pairs. Like I said, no one's ever folding any pair to a small bet. Also, he's going to be calling with some ace highs even that have backdoor draws. They have some equity. He's going to be calling with, of course, some queens and jacks that he has. Notice he's only really raising here with his best hands and his draws. Same story. When you want to raise, well, the times you want to raise are usually with your best hands or your draws. So anyway, easy call for Negreanu. Turn is the 3 of hearts, giving Negreanu a flush draw as well. Easy check for Negreanu. Polk again has to decide, does he want to bet? And Polk's strategy here, I think, is to triple barrel the turn and the river, and that's going to result in Negreanu hopefully folding out a jack or worse. Now, clearly, well, I say clearly, I don't think Negreanu's ever folding a queen in this scenario, and I don't think Doug Polk's trying to get him to fold a queen. But if Negreanu will fold out a jack by the river, that's going to result in Doug Polk just printing money by going with a bet. However, if Negreanu calls with every jack, which maybe he does, maybe he doesn't, that's going to result in Polk lighting his money on fire with these pocket fours. So a very, very cool scenario where I'm not exactly sure how Negreanu's playing, which really does impact my thoughts of these pocket fours, right? Anyway, Negreanu does check. And on this 3, I definitely think Doug Polk wants to go for a big size. He wants to polarize his range, right? He wants to put Negreanu in a spot where pretty much his entire range is a bluff catcher. And if you can make your opponent's entire range bluff catchers, it's usually going to put them in a pretty nasty spot on the river. Only time it's not so nasty is if your opponent realizes, okay, pocket 9s, just call, because our opponent likes to bluff, right? So anyway, let's see what he does. He does go for the pot size bet. Let's take a look at what the solver likes in this scenario for Doug Polk on the turn. Now, if Doug Polk does have these pocket fours, it does like a big bet size, 66% pot. And as you see, a lot of hands are going 66% pot here. Pretty much every hand that is a queen or better. Because, remember, most of Negreanu's check calling range is going to be the weak queens or worse. So a whole lot of underpairs, a whole lot of jacks. We see the hands that mostly prefer to check here are the jacks and draws that don't really want to get check shoved on. Notice here, like 10-8, right? If you bet 10-8 on the turn and get check shoved, you obviously have to fold, which is not great because that hand does have some equity. You'd much rather let it go check on the turn with 10-8 and then bluff it on the river if you don't have anything then. Notice here all of these low unpaired cards are also opting to check some portion of the time. Kind of neat to see. But most of the hands that are betting here are a lot of the king highs, because a king is probably good if you get it. A lot of the ace highs that are possible are betting as well that lack showdown value. Notice ace 10 and ace 9 don't do a whole lot of betting because those win when it checks down sometimes. But we do see a lot of betting from Doug Polk here. And this really does highlight the idea that whenever Negreanu check calls the flop, he has a marginal made hand most of the time. And if your opponent's range is somewhat marginal, that should induce you to value bet somewhat thin. Like notice here, any queen's value betting, even like ace jack and king jack are value betting using a pretty big size. And you're also going to be able to do a lot of bluffs when you are betting that wide. Okay? Negreanu obviously calls with this hand. Nothing really to see here. This is still a very clear marginal made hand. We do see a little bit of raising here, really with just like queen 10 and better, right? Some portion of the time. I'm kind of surprised to see queen 10 raising. Queen 9 raises every once in a while, but really just a lot of calling in this scenario. And if you know your opponent's kind of bluff happy, like if they like to bluff, then you should be even more inclined to call because you want to set them up to bluff on the river. And I would not be the least bit surprised if Negreanu has almost no turn raising strategy here, and I think that's probably a good decision. Okay. River comes, king of clubs, terrible card for Negreanu, great card for Polk. Negreanu checks. Polk has, in my mind, a pretty easy all-in, especially if he thinks Negreanu's range is mostly a queen or a jack or worse. He does go for the all-in. Good. I think this is fine and reasonable given everything we know. Now, I have a question for you. What is the worst hand that Daniel Negreanu should call with the majority of the time from a GTO point of view? Is it pocket fours? Is it jack 8? Is it ace jack? Is it queen 10? Is it king 9? What is it? I want you to pause the video and in the comment section below, write the worst hand that Daniel Negreanu should call with the majority of the time, assuming Doug Polk is playing the GTO strategy. Doing this will go a long way to helping you actively think about poker and improve your skills. So go ahead, I'll wait a second. I'll pause the video. Write it in the comments below. Okay, did you do it? Good. Going through this process over and over and over again of actually thinking about what you would do in game and then testing yourself will improve your poker skills. That is what I teach a ton at pokercoaching.com. You can actually get a free trial membership at pokercoaching.com/free. So make sure you do that if you want to improve your poker skills, which will let you make more money from the game, which will help you improve your life in whatever way you want. So make sure you check that out at pokercoaching.com/free. So, cool spot. First things first, should Polk bluff this hand? Turns out the solver bluffs it about half the time, for 36% of the time. Yeah, so a spot where he is betting a decent chunk of the time. Notice that in this scenario, now Polk is no longer betting the queens because these have become very clear marginal hands. Instead, he's betting the kings and better. Notice he has all these kings, and all these kings are opting to use the all-in size. The all-in bet size is the one highly preferred in this scenario. He's also bluffing with lots of these sporadic undercards, right? Lots of stuff like ace 4. Even hands like ace 3 and ace 2 are opting to bluff, which is kind of neat, right? But we do see lots of bluffs in this spot and lots of value bets from a king and better. Okay, knowing that, what should Negreanu call with? Hope you got it right. Turns out the cusp here is something like jack 8, jack 9, somewhere in here. If he has jack 9 or jack 8, we see here he's calling the vast majority of the time. We see some of the lower queen X folding. You may say, why is like jack 9 calling but queen X is folding? It turns out when you have jack 9, you block a hand like 10-9, right, which made a straight. Also, whenever you have a 4 in your hand, you're blocking some of the bluffs like ace 4 or 7-4, right? Notice here 7-4 likes to bluff, so you don't really want to have a 4 in your hand, right? So in this scenario, it turns out some of the queens are calling, some of the jacks are calling, but a hand like jack 8 is somewhere on the cusp of calling or folding. So I guess jack 8 is roughly the answer. There's no definitive answer, but again, going through that process will help you improve your poker skills. Notice here, like queen 9 calls basically every time, right? Which makes sense. Queen 8 calls the majority of the time as well. Same story. So that's roughly what's happening in this spot. Now, very, very important to think about this though. If we think Doug Polk is over bluffing, if he's betting the flop too often, betting the turn too often, betting the river too often, because I want to show you here, pocket fours doesn't bet the flop very often at all, right? If it does bet the flop, it doesn't bet the turn all that often. If it does bet the turn, it doesn't bet the river all that often. This is a spot where I would venture to say Doug Polk is probably over bluffing. If Doug Polk is over bluffing, Negreanu should widen his calling range substantially to include ace jack for sure, all the queens for sure, all the jacks for sure, and maybe even some of these underpairs. And you may say, doesn't that result in him calling with almost everything? And the answer is yeah, it does. If your opponent is over bluffing, you should substantially widen your calling range because they're bluffing too often, right? They just have far too many bluffs, which allows you to profitably call incredibly wide. And if your range is a whole lot of marginal made hands like Negreanu's is in this scenario, as it usually will be when your opponent takes the polarized line of blasting it, like Polk does here, you in turn should call off way more often. And I think that's the strategy Negreanu probably needs to implement until Doug Polk adjusts. That said, if Negreanu does call it off here with pocket sevens, and Doug Polk's bluffing a lot of the time, then that's going to result in Doug Polk adjusting probably either closer to the GTO strategy or maybe even to the point that he stops bluffing so much, in which case Negreanu's going to be lighting money on fire by calling with a pocket sevens. So definitely a cool spot. This is sort of a cat and mouse game where at this point in time, I think Doug Polk is probably over bluffing because he thinks Negreanu's over folding. And you may say, doesn't all Negreanu have to do is just check call with all of his queens and then he wins every time? No, because it turns out Negreanu doesn't actually have a queen all that often, right? Because like we see here, if this is his range, he has a hand worse than a queen a whole lot of the time. And that's going to result in him over folding if he folds out like all the jacks, right? And if he does fold out all the jacks by the river, then Polk's going to win a whole lot of small and medium pots. And it turns out those small and medium pots do add up to a very, very large amount of profit on average, even though Doug Polk may lose more than his fair share of these giant, all-in, overly exciting pots, right? Turns out a lot of the money you win from poker is just the small, medium, mundane pots that take place over and over and over again. And Negreanu needs to be very, very vigilant to make sure he's not overfolding in those spots going forward in this match. Otherwise, he's going to have a really, really tough time. So that's going to be it for today. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, click like, click subscribe. Good luck in your games. Have a lot of fun. Make the most of 2021. And I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye. Thanks for taking the time to watch this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want more strategy lessons, pre-flop charts, and interactive quizzes, make sure you get your free membership to pokercoaching.com right now at pokercoaching.com/free. I'll talk to you next time.